everybody. Bonjour tout le monde. J'espère que vous avez passé un bon fin de semaine chez...
I hope that you spent a great weekend at home.
Alors, nous sommes près de la fin de notre étude sur la...
We've got two witnesses here in Ottawa with us and one joining online. Just a brief reminder for witnesses in the room, if you have your headset plugged in but it's not on your ear, to please just make sure it's placed on the sticker in front of you in order to protect the health and well-being of our interpreters. Un petit rappel que tous les témoins ont effectué les...
Just a reminder that all witnesses have completed the required connection tests in advance of the meeting.
This is with us, as mentioned, from the Centre for the Study of Living Standards, Stephen Tapp, the Chief Executive Officer. From Danby, appearing by video conference, Jim Estill, the Chief Executive Officer. And from Universities Canada, Gabriel Miller, the President and Chief Executive Officer. Witnesses, you will have upwards of 5 minutes each for your introductory testimony. I tend to be a little bit generous, but if you see me frantically waving, that means you're getting close and ask you to wrap up. With that, Mr. Estill, I believe I'm going to ask you to go first, and you'll have 5 minutes beginning now. The floor is yours.
Perfect. Thank you. My name's Jim Estill. I'm an entrepreneur, founder, philanthropist, and proud Canadian. I'm owner of Danby Appliances, Arctic Snowplow, and Valcom, and have investments in many other Canadian companies. Danby has operations in the U.S. as well as Canada, but we are a Canadian company. I started my first business selling technology products from the trunk of my car, and I grew that business to $2 billion in sales. While I was building that business, I invested in, advised, and mentored over 150 tech startups in Canada. The most famous one I did was BlackBerry, where I was a founding board member, and I served on that board for 13 years. I was co-founding member of Communitech, a thriving tech hub in Waterloo. I was on the OMERS Ventures board when we invested in Shopify. I've been awarded the Order of Ontario, the Order of Canada, EY Entrepreneur of the Year. I have honorary degrees from the University of Waterloo, University of Guelph, and Humber College. My family and I have been afforded the opportunity to donate over $10 million to many charitable causes in Canada. We opened a furniture bank in Guelph that has helped over 300 families and diverted with their furniture and housewares and diverted tons from the local landfill. We've also sponsored and helped over 1,000 refugees, new Canadians, come to Canada. I'm honored to have the opportunity to speak today. I had to say all that because that's my staff said I needed to do all that. So that's got that over with. The government measures productivity in dollars, which is really the only way to do it. The problem is that often makes for an apples to oranges comparison. For example, if Apple takes $5,000 worth of parts and 200 hours of labor and turns it into $50,000 of iPhones, they are considered to be significantly more productive than Arctic Snowplow taking $5,000 in parts and 200 hours of labor and selling a $10,000 snowplow. Similarly, if Whirlpool or Samsung take a $200 fridge plus 2 hours and sell it for $500, they are more productive than Danby taking that same $200 fridge and 2 hours and selling it for $350. My point is, brand creates productivity. If a company like Danby has a higher cost of capital than Samsung, that higher cost would mean Danby is less productive. Some productivity is external. For example, if the price of oil increases by $10 per barrel, this increases the productivity per hour as measured by the government, even though the oil worker is producing the same number of barrels of oil. When people think productivity, they tend to think welding robots and AI and conveyors and robotic floor sweepers, etc. But productivity is much more than that. That said, I do think the accelerated depreciation on those items that are specifically tied to productivity do make sense, and it has only a modest interest cost to the government. So I was thinking, why wouldn't companies invest in these if there's a savings? And one reason might be capital. I always try to look for win-win, and I understand where money comes from. If it comes from the government, that doesn't fall from the sky. That's paid for by all of us. The government's access to capital and their cost is much lower than businesses. If a government were to allow business to delay paying their HST for 6 months, they could even charge a 3% interest rate, which means the government is not out anything, and the businesses will be saving 5% annual, 8% annual, depending on what their cost of borrowing is. I'm a business person and a capitalist. I do not believe in government supports for businesses, but at least if you're going to have supports, have them spread fairly. The current grants are directed to startups and large companies with good lobby groups. When you give government grants to auto sector, you are making a company like Danby less productive because you're taking money from us. Same when you build an oil pipeline, that's taking money from the economy, which makes the companies less efficient. Any new government program will add inefficiency to Canada. I suggest it might be more efficient to simply expand some of the programs now in place. For example, SR&ED should and could be applied to AI training, AI implementation in companies. And like all SR&ED, if the company uses Canadian inputs, those inputs qualify for SR&ED, so we get double impact. I like doing double impact. So if the government's going to spend money, they might as well buy Canadian and pay a small premium. I'm a taxpayer, so I do want it to be a small premium. And that small premium would spill over into jobs and prosperity, which in turn means more tax revenue. This said, we need to be cautious not to massively announce or change things, or the US government won't buy from Canadian companies. Municipalities could likely do more buy Canadian without getting on the US radar. Problem is municipalities have no money, so it might not be a bad idea for Canada to offer a small subsidy to help them do that. Canada does not need more programs. It needs to better understand and execute with what works. Productivity is not just about machines. It's about creating conditions where businesses can thrive, innovate, and compete globally. If we get this right, we don't just boost productivity, we build a stronger, more resilient Canada. Thank you. That's my opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Estelle. Mr. Miller, we'll go to you next. Upwards of 5 minutes.
Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs, membres du comité.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen of the committee. My name is Gabriel Miller, and I'm the President and CEO of Universities Canada. Thank you for inviting me to speak today on a topic that is so crucial to the economic future of our country, Canada's productivity and competitiveness. Universities Canada represents 97 institutions of all sizes, research-intensive universities, regional comprehensive institutions, and smaller specialized institutions. Together, they form a dynamic research ecosystem that is essential to the country's prosperity.
To tackle its biggest challenges, affordability, housing, healthcare, productivity, and long-term economic growth depend on its universities. Universities are pillars of their communities, contributing $48.7 billion in economic activity each year and supporting more than 440,000 jobs. They also vitally contribute knowledge and talent that drive Canada's economy. A university education delivers higher earnings, greater job security, and stronger participation in the labor market. It also provides the talent that keeps our hospitals, classrooms, research facilities, and industries running every day. Canada's universities train 1.4 million students each year, the next generation of innovators, entrepreneurs, and leaders. Universities have helped build this country, and they are indispensable to building a prosperous future. Prosperity and productivity go hand in hand, as you all know, and both depend on a highly skilled workforce. Today, nearly half of undergraduate students in Canada participate in work-integrated learning, gaining the practical experience that aligns their skills with employer needs. Across the country, our universities are working hand in hand with industry to solve real problems. They're turning research into results, new technologies, companies, and solutions for Canadians. University research is one of Canada's most powerful engines of growth. Our institutions conduct more than a third of Canada's total R&D, generating discoveries, attracting investment, and strengthening competitiveness. These outcomes happen when research meets industry and communities. And with emerging technologies, from AI and quantum to clean tech, the demand for research talent will only grow. But many institutions simply don't have the resources to take discoveries from the lab to the marketplace, or to keep the intellectual property and its economic benefits here in Canada. And the challenge doesn't fall on universities alone. Our small and medium-sized enterprises face similar challenges. They account for 96% of Canada's private sector, yet lack the resources to adopt new technologies or pursue their own IP strategies. The result is predictable. We lose valuable intellectual property and the economic opportunities it should generate. With stronger partnerships between government, universities, and industry, and with targeted support for IP protection and commercialization, Canada can keep more of its innovation here at home. So let me close with the following 3 recommendations. First, engage universities directly in major nation-building projects. Initiatives like Borealis and the Defense Industrial Strategy show potential. Deep engagement throughout these projects and all major nation-building efforts will strengthen our talent pipelines and help scale Canadian technologies. Second, partner with universities to advance AI breakthroughs and adoption. AI can radically enhance productivity across the economy. Universities are already helping businesses integrate AI tools through training, mentorship, and applied research. With federal investment, these efforts could scale nationally and help businesses adopt emerging technology more rapidly. Third and finally, strengthen university tech transfer and accelerator infrastructure. Targeted support for tech transfer offices, incubators, and accelerators will help turn Canadian research into Canadian companies, jobs, and economic growth. Addressing Canada's commercialization and productivity challenges will require many solutions, but these steps can deliver significant impact quickly. Je vous remercie de m'avoir donné l'occasion.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity to address you today, and I'm ready to answer your questions.
Miller, Mr. Tapp, floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair and committee members, for the opportunity to appear today. My name is Stephen Tapp. I'm the CEO at the Centre for the Study of Living Standards. CSLS is a Canadian nonprofit research organization that was founded in 1995. Canada's productivity performance has been a long-standing concern, but it's now widely acknowledged that we face a productivity emergency. Over the past 50 years, our labour productivity growth has slowed dramatically. In the post-war period, productivity grew at nearly 4% a year. Since 2000, it has grown by less than 1% a year. To put this change in perspective, before the slowdown, productivity doubled in 19 years. Now it takes about 90 years. This means that economic progress that each generation previously enjoyed now takes longer than most lifetimes. If we don't reverse these trends, growth in living standards will remain too sluggish, and it will be harder to fund the essential public services that Canadians rely on. In CSLS research, which was part of an international collaboration led by the UK Productivity Institute, Andrew Sharp and I examined Canada's historical productivity performance. While far from perfect, we find that Canadian governments have generally pursued a lot of different pro-productivity policies over the years, from liberalizing trade to targeting inflation, modernizing taxes, and investing in human capital. Despite these actions, productivity growth has stagnated in Canada and across most advanced economies. Why? There are many factors that help explain the slowdown, including Canada has a small domestic market that represents a shrinking share of global economic activity. Most of our firms are small and have had limited success in scaling up. Competitive pressures and business dynamism have weakened over the last decades. Regulations have increased, becoming more complex and costly to navigate, and our international trade position was lagging well before recent U.S. protectionism. Ultimately, however, we think the biggest drivers of Canada's poor productivity are slow technological progress and chronically weak business investment. It's encouraging then that Budget 2025 seeks to raise investment, as we think this correctly diagnoses a key part of the problem. That said, we must acknowledge that Canada's economy is at its most challenging juncture in decades. U.S. tariffs and threats have created massive uncertainty, and the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement will soon come under existential pressure in the 2026 review. This makes efforts to spur investment even more important, but also more difficult. Given these external challenges, Canada should focus on what we control, with a policy agenda that aims to incentivize technological adoption and investment, support international trade participation and diversification, improve internal market efficiency, modernize the tax system, and enhance skills and workforce training. Gabriel mentioned artificial intelligence, and we think AI, a technology which Canada helped to pioneer, also represents a major opportunity. That's why in June, the CSLS launched the Canadian AI Adoption Initiative in partnership with CIGI and the University of Waterloo to support and track progress on broad-based AI adoption across the economy. In all areas, we should reach for every basis point of growth we can get. Gradual, sustained progress can meaningfully improve living standards when compounded over time. Before closing, I want to highlight that while national GDP and productivity indicators provide essential signals, they don't capture the full picture. Broader measurement that digs into and beyond the national numbers, like the CSLS indexes of economic well-being and human development, reveal large disparities across Canada. On human development, for example, we estimate that Canada's top-ranking jurisdictions of Ontario, Quebec, and Alberta would place 15th to 17th globally. By contrast, in the territories, Nunavut ranks around 70th globally. This effectively represents the difference between living in a place like the UK versus Albania, based on these implied rankings. Such disparities underscore the enduring challenges, particularly in Canada's north and Indigenous and remote communities, as well as the need for place-based policy approaches. CSLS research also suggests that traditional economic indicators, as disappointing as they've been, may actually have overstated Canada's progress. Because when you look beyond the aggregate results, you see that we face more inequality and more risk than we did decades ago. In closing, Canada's productivity performance has been disappointing and the outlook is challenging. It will take time to address these complex and long-standing challenges. By correctly diagnosing the root causes, leveraging new technologies, and implementing policy reforms, we can strengthen productivity slowly but surely to make a meaningful difference over the long run. To guide that progress, traditional indicators should be complemented with beyond GDP measures to support more inclusive and resilient prosperity for all Canadians. Thank you for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tapp. Okay, colleagues, we'll enter our line of questioning. Mr. Falk, floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank all of our witnesses for their testimony here this morning. Very interesting. Mr. Estelle, I would like to begin with you. You made a comment that our productivity isn't necessarily measured by the right metrics. You said it's not always about the dollar amounts, it's actually about what is being produced. Could you expand on that a little bit, what you mean by that, so we have a full understanding here at committee?
Sure. I mean, there's no real easy way to compare apples and oranges, but productivity has to be measured in dollars. But making a fridge is not comparable to making a car, is not comparable to making an iPhone, is not comparable to Microsoft selling software or Google selling advertising. And so we measure productivity and think that we don't have productivity. It's almost like your own fitness level or running. You try to improve your own time as opposed to trying to, well, I guess you do try to, in that case, to beat other people. But it is, I don't know of a way to measure better than with the dollars, but that, yeah.
Also made is that too much government spending negatively impacts our productivity data.
Yes, that's correct.
So part of our poor productivity data may be attributed to overspending by the government.
You could say that all governments overspend, but I'm a capitalist.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Miller. We've got a few questions for you as well. Mr. Tapp, in his recent report from his organization, a November report on productivity, I don't know if you've had a chance to see it, but it states that chart number 5 says that tertiary education attainment rates in the OECD countries are the highest among those countries. And yet, somewhere just over 63%, we often compare ourselves to the Americans, which are just over 50%. And yet, those high education rates haven't translated into higher productivity based on the data. Mr. Carney, just in the last few days, said that our government is no longer a feminist policy foreign government. Do you think our universities have disproportionately emphasized too much on DEI and woke policies and not enough on hard education?
Well, I think, speak most persuasively from my own experience, and I spend time with university presidents just about every week, and I'm on campus seeing students and faculty throughout the year. I meet hundreds of people on our campuses, and what I see with my eyes are people who are remarkably focused on the future. I think students are more engaged in their studies and preparing to be successful in the economy, perhaps than they ever have been. Certainly, they seem more focused on the future than my friends and I were when we were in university. So my sense from our universities is they continue to do an excellent job on preparing people to go out into the workforce. I would also add, and Stephen may correct me, but there's something misleading about the way we talk about Canada's higher education attainment. When it comes to undergraduate performance, we're basically middle of the pack, and we're lagging other OECD countries when it comes to graduate degrees completed.
My question was specific. Have we put too much emphasis on DEI and those social issues rather than actually on teaching core competencies like engineering and entrepreneurship?
I think we're doing a great job of teaching core competencies. And I would just add,
It doesn't show in the data. So my next question is for Mr. Tapp. Mr. Tapp, on your report from November, on your chart number 2, it shows here the relative labor productivity levels per hour in business sector. And I see you've got historical information from 1947 to 2023. I do take notice that during the time of 2008 to 2015, there was actually a trend of increasing productivity. And since 2015, during the Justin Trudeau years, we saw actually sharp declines in productivity. You mentioned in your comments about we've become overregulated. Can you tell me what regulations in specific you're referring to that have negatively impacted productivity?
Okay, sure. So let me take the first part of the question first, just regarding productivity. I think it's important to note that Canada's productivity performance since, let's say, the year 2000 or so has been relatively middling versus the OECD economies. So we have done worse, I think, from 2015. Part of that reflects the fact that global oil prices came down significantly in 2014-15, and a lot of the investment that we had in the energy sector has disappeared to a large extent. That was responsible for about a third of our capital stock and overall capital spending, and there have not been other sectors that have kind of come in to capture that.
Bills C-48, C-69 that have really dampened our oil and gas industry have negatively impacted our productivity.
I would say the lack of investment in the energy sector over the last decade and over longer periods of time has made it more difficult for us to compete and contribute and to do well in the economy. I think the second part of your initial question was on the regulations. So I can't speak to specific regulations. I'm more of a macroeconomist, and we do aggregate level data, so we don't look line by line. But I will highlight that there was a StatCan report that did some research looking over a 15-year period, and it highlighted that there was an increase in federal regulations of over 2% a year in the period that they looked at. They did some estimates and modeling of that they suggested that GDP was about close to 2% lower because of that, and in particular that the investment was 9% lower. So this discourages entry of businesses, it discourages investment particularly. And so I think to some extent the fact that we have a major projects office is an admission that it's difficult to get large projects done, and so we're trying to move around that process and move things forward. That's a good initiative, and we'll hopefully see that bears some fruit.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Madame O'Rourke, floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Quick point of order,
Yes.
Chair Carr.
Yes.
So MP Falk referred to our Prime Minister as Mr. Carney. When the Minister of Industry was here, MP Dancho asked that she be referred to as MP Dancho. And I would just ask that at this committee that we use the Prime Minister's title, which he earned from Canadians.
So, Madame O'Rourke, appreciate the point. There's no standing order at committee that has been violated. Therefore, no point of order specific to the breach of regulations that I can rule on, but appreciate the intervention. The floor is yours for your line of questioning.
Thanks very much, Chair Carr. Mr. Estill, thank you very much for joining us. Danby is a stalwart in Guelph, and Mr. Estill himself personally sponsored 50 Syrian families to come to Guelph and provided employment and all kinds of support. So both in business and in philanthropy, he's certainly a leader in my eyes and in the eyes of many, many people. So, Mr. Estill, Budget 2025 proposes a number of measures, major projects, home building, investments in AI, in the defense industrial strategy, a number of ways to pivot to more international markets while shoring up the industries that have been affected by U.S. tariffs, including the Regional Tariff Response Initiative, accelerating Canadian R&D through the productivity super deduction and expanding SHRED. So just to name a few, there's a lot in this budget. I'm curious, which of these measures do you believe will be most helpful in boosting productivity, and what other approaches do you believe would be effective? And if you could take a minute or two, that'd be helpful, because I also have a question for Mr. Tapp.
So I think an investment in AI is going to have the best return. When there's a change happen, the companies that pivot to it quickest end up being the winners. We don't want to be the laggards in that. So I think AI, we have a housing issue, so investments in housing is logical. I hate to say it, but investments in defense are also necessary based on what the current state of the world. So AI is where I would put my money personally.
Terrific. And are there other measures that you believe would be important to boost productivity? Particularly, you mentioned medium-sized businesses. What do you think would be most effective for them?
So the key, if you're going to be giving money to companies that have bigger lobby groups, you miss all of the middle pack. And so having programs which, as I said, I don't really believe in having any programs, but if you're going to have programs, then you have to have something for the mid-size in the market, because the mid-size in the market creates tens of thousands of jobs, and it creates a diversity in our economy. If we're only a car manufacturing economy or only an oil economy, then we've got a problem. We want to have diversification in that. I love the idea, I love the idea of selling to international markets, but I have to say that is difficult for most Canadian companies. To make a sales call in Germany costs $10,000. We can't be there in any, we can't be there tomorrow. The regulations are different. The laws are different. And they're not, these other markets aren't sitting there saying, gee, we don't have any fridges. We're just waiting for you to ship your fridges in. They've already got fridges, and fridges are big and not very shippable and blah, 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 right? So.
Thank you very much. My next question is for Mr. Tapp. Mr. Tapp, you were an economist with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce when we met last year in Guelph. You indicated my riding is one of the most vulnerable in the country to tariffs. And at the same time, there was a conversation around the initial use of counter tariffs, but you indicated that those could not be maintained in the longer term. So the opposition has mentioned, that this is elbows down, but I'm wondering if you would comment on the appropriateness of this situational leadership over time, and whether we are meeting the moment with an appropriate response.
Thank you for the question. First, I think we have to acknowledge just the difficulty of the moment. I think the uncertainty and the scale of changes in U.S. tariff policy has been more or less unprecedented. So the discussions we had, I think, were early in the process when I was at the Chamber of Commerce. And you're right, Guelph is very highly impacted. Southwestern Ontario certainly going to be under the gun under these tariffs. The government's response initially was a counter-tariff measures. I think from a game theoretic perspective, people had considered if the counter-tariffs increase pressure politically on the U.S. and cause them to drop the tariffs, then that's a smart move. If it became clear a few months into the strategy that it was unlikely to have any deterrent effect on Donald Trump, then keeping the tariffs in place is just going to raise our costs and reduce our productivity. And so, getting rid of those counter tariffs is probably the best policy approach at this point in time.
Thanks very much. You indicated that the current uncertainty is also impacting productivity, that counter tariffs would raise prices in addition to the tariffs that are in place. I had a question about you from a perspective now of the Centre for the Study of Living Standards. We've had a number of witnesses who have come to say we need to, eliminate taxes significantly. We need to eliminate regulations significantly. We need to, a number of measures. So I'm wondering, though, taxes pay for services in this country. They pay for education. They pay for the skills training that we're investing in. So how do you avoid a race to the bottom in terms of taxation or regulation? And it's not to say that we don't need to adjust things, but what's the framework to assess from an economic point of view, from a productivity point of view, really the best way to weigh those pros and cons?
Just got about 30 seconds here.
So the budget in 2025 lays out, there's a chart in there, I don't know the number of the chart, but it looks at marginal effective tax rates. That's often how economists will look at providing incentives for investment. And you can see there that with some of the reductions in increased accelerated capital cost allowance expenses, we have reduced to most extent across many sectors similar to the U.S. The bigger problem, as we mentioned before, though, is the level of uncertainty right now, and I think that our folks at Danby and others can attest to this. Regardless of the policies that are in place in the near term, it's going to be very difficult for people looking for longer-term investments to be sinking in multi-million, multi-billion-dollar projects when they're unclear about the access they're going to have to the U.S. market in the near term.
Merci, Madame O'Rourke. Okay, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
Mr. Saint-Marie, you're virtual today. It's always great to see you.
Plaisir partagé.
6 minutes.
Merci.
Greetings to all colleagues and to the witnesses. And thank you for your presentations. My question is for Mr. Miller.
Un survol dans votre présentation.
You provided an overview in your presentation.
Just a minute, Mr. Miller.
Just a second. Mr. Miller, your body language is telling me that you need help with the interpretation.
No, that's okay. Monsieur Saint-Marie, just un moment.
Mr. Saint-Marie, just a second, please.
Okay. Just un petit test, Monsieur Saint-Marie.
All right, let's do a little test. Mr. Miller, can you hear the interpreter? All right, perfect. All right, Mr. Saint-Marie, 6 minutes. Thank you. As I was saying, thank you to the witnesses for being there and for making their presentations. My question is for Mr. Miller of Universities Canada. You referred to this in your presentation, and I'd like us to come back in greater detail about the current obstacles to marketing research that's being done in universities. So what is an overview of the situation? What are those obstacles to marketing the research that's being done in universities?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for your question.
Two, I think, obstacles are most relevant to the committee's work. The first is there are just very limited resources inside the university to support researchers in commercializing their work, creating the linkages to industry required to take it to market. We have, in many universities, offices set up to do this, but they are, in many cases, underfunded. And so providing proper support to build the capacity within the university among researchers to commercialize research so that Canada can benefit is key. And then the second part is, of course, you need partners outside the university in order for Canada to benefit from what's happening inside the university. And so steps that can help us scale up investments and turn them into viable industries, businesses, products is critically important. And one area where I think we're seeing some progress on that is the work the government is doing to tie research investments to its broader industrial strategy, including on sovereignty and defense, and that work is important and should continue.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Donc,
thank you.
Consulter,
all right. After consulting your recommendations with respect to the budget,
d'accroître le soutien financier qui est destiné au programme de commercialisation de la...
The need for increasing support to commercialization in universities. So that was the first part.
Seconde, dans votre...
And now in my second question.
Des exemples d'incubateurs.
Examples of incubators and so forth.
Et davantage de détails.
Could you give me more detail on
transfert auprès des entreprises de
transfers and what form that could take? Thank you.
Sure, and I'd be happy to follow up with the member and other members with a list of specific examples. What's key is in these tech transfer offices, and there are not many in Quebec and elsewhere across the country, one of the most important functions they play is helping university researchers turn their work into intellectual property. And so that capacity is critically important, but then also helping them to develop the skills and the connections so that that IP can then be turned into economic opportunities both in their community and in other parts of the country.
OK, merci beaucoup. Je voudrais qu'on parle.
Thank you. I'd like us to talk about small and medium enterprises. You referred to it in your presentation. There are a lot of SMEs that share a substantial share in our economy.
Plus spécifique.
Do you have more specific details on how we could better integrate technological advances that are done at university and applications in SMEs?
Yeah, well, so the real challenge here is simply in the capacity of smaller businesses to free up the capital and to access the expertise required to take advantage of these opportunities and then scale them up in Canada. And then, so this is one of the reasons why so much of the research we produce and the intellectual property we create ends up being taken to market outside of Canada by much larger firms. And so there are a number of programs within the federal government now that have scaled up could continue to make it more viable for small businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises to scale up, but also for us to scale up in other ways, to use, for instance, the research agenda and the procurement associated with Canada's new defence industrial strategy to make the commercialization of Canadian research more viable. And let me just be more specific on this place. The use of procurement is a really valuable opportunity because oftentimes it's the lack of certainty that faces a smaller company about its ability to then recover its investment and profit in the future that ends up discouraging them or making it financially impossible for them to take that leap and scale up using Canadian research. With proper use of procurement, with guaranteed customers at the other end, that can de-risk that process for smaller companies and make it much more viable for an economy like ours, which is so dependent on small and medium-sized enterprises to keep more of its research commercialized here in Canada.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I see that my time is over. I will have other questions during the next round. Yes, and I'll add 30 seconds onto your next round.
This morning, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to all of the witnesses for being here this morning. My questions are for Mr. Miller right now. Mr. Miller, talent shortages are a major factor behind weak business investment. How important are universities in fixing this gap, and what reforms do you believe are most urgent?
Thank you for the question. I completely agree that our future success, whether it's in these giant national ambitions that have been announced recently by the government or simply in terms of making our economy more productive, is going to depend on the quality of the talent we have, both what we make of the Canadian talent that's born and raised here, but also how we use our system of attracting international talent to greatest effect. I would focus on one thing right now when it comes to near-term talent needs, and that is, as we all know, Canada has substantially scaled back its system for international student attraction. And what that means is we need to make the very most of the more limited number of spaces that we're going to have to bring what are going to be future entrepreneurs, engineers, doctors here, people who may end up staying in Canada if they decide to immigrate and they're accepted, or in many cases will go back to other parts of the world and create invaluable trade connections to Canada. And the single thing I think that the country could do right now that will improve our performance in that area is to begin to coordinate more strongly within Ottawa and between the federal government and provincial governments to make sure that we're achieving our objectives. And a very encouraging development recently was the announcement of a $1.7 billion talent attraction strategy in this year's budget. If we pair those investments in future researchers with a highly effective visa processing system and strategy to promote Canada to the best and brightest, we will begin to win again in the international competition for talent.
Okay, and so which industries do you believe are struggling the most with talent gaps?
Well, this will give me a chance to go back to the point that Mr. Falk raised, which was that one of the things we can see is that Canada has a shortage of highly skilled talent, particularly in key areas such as artificial intelligence. And there's two things I think we need to highlight about this. One is Canada was a global leader on AI and remains one in a research capacity, but has lost a good deal of the talent that came up through its universities. And we need to focus on equipping the country's economy to hold on to more of those people. But I think we also have to acknowledge that Canada is not a top global performer when it comes to creating graduate level researchers and future workers in key strategic fields. And so I have a number in front of me that says we are 25th among OECD countries in the share of adults with graduate degrees. So we need to have not just good general education performance, we need much more high-level performance when it comes to the best and brightest in strategic areas.
And so how much does funding levels have to do with that?
Well, it has a lot to do with it because, first of all, our research ecosystem is only as strong as the institutions that drive it. And as many of you know, universities in Canada are going through a period of profound financial challenge. The Change International Student Rules has brought that to the surface, and we need to get that system working right again in a sustainable way. But it's really just revealed a challenge nationally that Canada has been underinvesting in education, higher education now for some time. There are ways the federal government can be supportive. Its recent investments are helpful. Making its investments in research, in infrastructure, even in student housing as predictable and sustainable as possible will help our institutions be more sustainable so that they can then do more work to attract research talent and develop the people who are going to lead us to the front of the global economy in a world that's going to be driven increasingly by AI and quantum computing and other cutting-edge technologies.
Thank you. All the time that we have for your line of questioning. Mr. Bardizzi, 5 minutes to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. First, a question to Mr. Miller. I just want to pick up on the talent investment that you referred to. What kinds of actions and activities will we need subsequent to the, now that this program's been announced, to make sure that these investments drive productivity? These investments in new talent attraction and including doctoral and postdoctoral students.
Just one moment, Mr. Miller.
Okay. Oh.
Okay, seems to be good.
Yep,
Mr.
it's
Miller, if
right
you just
now.
want to repeat your remarks so
Sure.
that we've got them in both languages. Thank you.
I'll try and remember what I was going to say. I would say two things here. One is I think what we're seeing in the budget and more generally from the government is a recognition that the more integrated the relationship between universities, industry, and business from the start in these initiatives, the better our performance is going to be, because that feedback from business and from outside the university can help make sure the research is as focused on the needs of the Canadian economy as possible. And going back the other way, those relationships will help researchers develop breakthroughs, technologies that will be applied and have the greatest chance to be commercialized. So early, ongoing engagement as these programs are designed and rolled out, also to assist with speed, I think is very important. And then the other piece is we need to have an integrated strategy. And that's being increasingly recognized. We can see with something like the Defense Industrial Strategy, the recognition that these players need to be at the same table from before the design of a program. But we now need to make the connection between, and let's just take the talent attraction investments. The government has made a sizable commitment to fund chairs and future researchers, the people who can make our labs leaders in things like AI. There is also work done at the Global Affairs to promote Canada to talent globally, and then the process of welcoming those people and processing applications at immigration. We need to get those folks as much as possible on the same page and working with our provinces and territories so that in Canada and outside of Canada, the message to the talented people in the areas we want is being delivered very, very clearly and consistently, and we're doing everything to bring them here in as seamless and effective a way as possible.
Thank you. Now to Mr. Tapp. For quite a while, the Centre has been doing research on a variety of productivity-related topics, and I think you referred to the major productivity set of studies that you're doing. And I just wanted to ask about the most recent one, and I'm just quoting from the abstract here. Our analysis suggests that successive Canadian governments have generally pursued relatively market-oriented productivity reforms, yet productivity growth continues to falter. The main drivers appear to be declining technological progress and inadequate business investment, not an absence of policy effort. And I'm wondering if you could just maybe tease out this notion of this more fundamental issue of inadequate business investment that you see in your research over the longer term, and what might explain it.
Thank you for the question. I'll just point out the research that you're mentioning there. We were asked to do the Canadian study. There's 17 different studies from 17 different countries for the UK Productivity Institute. So we were trying to look at what was the productivity performance in Canada's economy over long periods of time, and what was the role of public policy in either making that better or making that worse. We analyzed a lot of different data. We did some decompositions and various measures. As you mentioned, we came to the conclusion that it's not as though Canadian policymakers have been asleep at the wheel. Don Drummond, actually, in the International Productivity Monitor that we published about 10 or 15 years ago, said economists have come forward with a lot of different recommendations. We cited some of those. And about 70% of that list has been implemented, maybe not to the full extent of what people wanted. But we shouldn't think that the remaining 30 would necessarily get us to the point where productivity is going to take a major improvement. So I think our diagnosis came down to there's a systemic and complex issue. It's been going on for a long period of time. But slow technological progress is a driver. That's happening in Canada, but that's happening globally as well, where we're getting more and more research dollars getting less and less out, and that's just sort of getting towards the frontier and that moving more slowly. That just seems to be the case of where we are with technology. I do think, as others mentioned on AI, I think we have some options, but the weak business investment in Canada is something that stands out relative to others. And as I mentioned, I think the government is taking some policies now to really put investment front and center. They're looking at capital budgeting framework, which is going to sharpen incentives and improve that. But I think in the near term, I'm relatively pessimistic about the ability to have a big impact on major projects in Canada, at least from the private sector and at least in manufacturing, as we're facing a big trade shock. But I'm optimistic over longer term that Canada can do better.
Mr. Bardisi, it's cutting it tight now for the introduction of another question. Monsieur Saint-Marie, j'ai ajouté...
Mr. Saint-Marie, I've added 30 seconds, so you'll have 3 minutes. Excellent, thank you.
Trêve de plaisanterie, toujours pour...
So, Mr. Miller,
parle beaucoup et vous avez fait référence dans votre...
You talked about this in your presentation. You talked about the great potential of AI to increase productivity. I'd like to hear you talk more about IA and its possibly negative impact on training of students. We know that with generative IA like ChatGPT, students will often use it to help them in their homework and in their research.
Vos membres et selon votre organisme.
Now, according to your organization and your members, what are the strategies that we should adopt to ensure that our young people receive high quality education using those tools, of course?
Well, it's a very good question, and let's be... c'est important d'être honnête que oui, il y a des grandes opportunités.
It's important to be honest that there are big opportunities with IA, but there are risks as well.
défis.
And there are challenges.
I hear about it from our members all of the time. Obviously, two things that leap out are the challenges it creates in terms of assessing and evaluating students. And universities are busy addressing that to make sure that they're changing or adjusting the way they test students so that they're responding to the challenge that, you know, people could be relying on artificial intelligence to do their work for them. And we know that making sure that we're getting a clear picture of what students have learned is going to be critical to the effectiveness of our education system. What we're also hearing more about, and I think that the research on this is still developing, is, you know, what are the effects on people's critical reasoning abilities and frankly their capacity to learn and to solve problems on their own if there is an artificial intelligence agent or resource that can do so much of that work for them. I would say that some early indications of this, of I think where we're heading and what's going to be important is, one, it's very important that we not try and push AI away or to seal the university or our workplaces off from it. What we need to be doing is engaging with it and confronting these challenges directly. I think also what's critically important is that students are being asked to use AI in a way that actually strengthens and reinforces those fundamental capacities that we're worried about being eroded. And so we're now at the point, the latest numbers I've seen is up to about 50% of university classrooms are using AI consciously and deliberately in the as part of the program, and nearly that number are asking students to use it as part of their assignments, so that they're engaging critically with these tools and in fact critically assessing the information and the tasks that AI is performing. And this is what it's going to require for us to succeed socially and economically. These tools can massively amplify what humans can achieve, but we need to maintain our ability to steer and to think critically about them. And so by harnessing their power and exposing students to them, we can get the best of what these tools can offer them while managing the worst of what they might threaten.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Saint-Marie. Mr. Gugelmin?
Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie.
Mr. Chair. Mr. Estel, as somebody who spent their career in on the operations side in the manufacturing sector, you and I certainly share a lot of views on plant productivity and efficiency, and just how it's likely the best mechanism to drive ROI for a business. Now, in recent remarks, you suggested a simple change allowing full write-offs for venture investment to encourage Canadians to invest more of their own capital into new ventures, noting that Canada has strong early-stage programs, but very few mechanisms that actually reward private investors for backing new ventures with their own capital. So would you say in the past the federal government's relied too much on its own subsidy and not enough on tax changes that actually mobilize private risk capital, like the full write-off idea that you floated, and to do this for productivity-enhancing purposes?
Well, what I like to do is come up with win-win solutions. A full write-off doesn't actually cost the government anything, but possibly a little bit of interest. If I invest $1 million in a new business and it goes bankrupt, I get that write-off 5 years from now or 10 years from now. If I invest $1 million, get a full write-off today, and it sells for $10 million in 5 years, it means my capital gain is you still get the tax on that. So that was one of the reasons to float that. And anything we can do that has low cost to the government that encourages more entrepreneurship, in my opinion, stimulates. And I mean, one of the other witnesses talked about the uncertainty in the current environment. I mean, with tariffs and where things are going, everyone's going to underinvest. No one's going to build a new factory today because you don't know where you're going to sell the stuff.
So if we're to adopt some of these programs, let's say like specific targeted tax incentives, for instance, to try and drive this type of investment at home, do you think that would prevent some of the capital flight that we're seeing in Canada today?
Nothing is going to prevent it, but yes, it would slow it. I mean, investors invest where they think they can get the best bang for their dollar. It would stimulate investment, but nothing ever stops it.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, the Council of Canadian Academy's State of Science and Technology and Innovation found that Canada is facing a worsening productivity crisis with business and government sectors, STI performance declining, stubbornly low business R&D, and slow technology adaptation. Even as higher education, they put it, remains a bright spot in our country. It notes that our research and talent base is strong, but it's at an increasing amount of risk. So from where you sit, do you feel that we're converting that university-based talent and research excellence into domestic capital formulation and productivity growth? Or are many of our top graduates and ideas when it comes to commercialization still being done abroad?
Well, there's no question that many of our top graduates, as you just put it, and a lot of the IP that's generated in our universities is leaving the country. And I think we've accomplished a lot in Canada in terms of preparing for a time, which is now, when we can benefit more from the research and training that's being done in our universities. But to do that, we are going to have to really bear down and increase the capacity of our researchers to connect with the private sector and the private sector to scale up here at home the benefits, but also the opportunities that go with that. So there is a long way for Canada to go on this, but there's no time to waste.
Is there any specific policies that you might identify that could explain some of that disconnect, how our world-class research could be used in a more productive way by attracting investment capital to Canada and retaining some of that talent?
Well, we know that there's some inherent challenges in Canada, relative, say, to the United States, that makes it challenging for us to scale up the commercial opportunities that flow from our research in our own economy and keep those opportunities here. I do think that we've done a good job of building the capacity to start changing this. And I just want to say this is a broad point, but the gap between what's happening in labs and classrooms and what's happening outside it in the economy can sometimes be big. And I think that one of the things Canada's done over the last 30 years is really tried to narrow that in two ways. One, by exposing more students to the workplace while they're being educated. And so now about half of our students graduate with workplace experience when they leave the university campus. And the other has been reorienting our research culture to be one that is much more focused on the needs of our business community. And we're starting to see that bear fruit.
Thank you, Mr. Guglin. Mr. Danko, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. First question is to Mr. Miller. I represent a riding that has 3 post-secondary institutions, McMaster, Mohawk, and Redeemer. I also happen to have 2 kids that are 17 and 19, so right in that area where they're transitioning to their post-secondary career. And you talked about the role of universities to develop Canada's highly skilled workforce. And we talked about engineering, science, research. I'm a structural engineer. I'm very familiar with that part of university education. But I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand on the role and the value of humanities, social sciences, and the arts. Because when I talk to businesses, often what they are looking for in employees is employees that can act independently, that have critical thought, and are solution-driven, that can articulate themselves and communicate. So would you like to talk about the value of those other parts of a university education in part of Canada's workforce development? Thank you.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the first point is and probably the most important is the one you just made, which is that, pretty consistently in surveys of employers, the skills that they're looking for are skills that are not as much narrowly technical, but are about the broad ability of a student and a new employee to exhibit leadership, communicate with colleagues, work across cultural boundaries. And these are all skills that are associated in many ways with education in the humanities and social sciences. I'd also say that our research agenda is going to be desperately in need of insights from these disciplines, because, and I think we can see what's happening globally right now. There's obviously, the technical capacity to develop new products. There is the ability to market and sell them, but there's also the cohesion of your society and the ability to address political, social, economic challenges. And if those systems break down, our ability to create prosperity and to benefit from it are very, very much limited. I'll just finish with this. I think the picture that's coming into view is we're going to need well-rounded, adaptable people. The kids who are studying philosophy or history are also going to need to be exposed to AI, so that what we have coming out are people who are ready to jump into the workforce, but also have underlying skills that can serve them well throughout their career.
Thank you. Changing subjects here. So Mr. Ersmith and Mr. Tapp, you both spoke about GDP as a measure of productivity being problematic. And I want to give you two examples and then ask you to comment. So the first is valuation of AI and tech companies is often based on speculation. So they have these massive valuations, but they don't actually produce anything. So on paper, they have high productivity. In reality, they're not really making anything. Cryptocurrencies being an extreme example of what I would consider a pretend economy. Also, if you're strictly measuring productivity based on GDP, there's an incentive to build bad products. An example would be in the housing industry, if I'm building minimum code products that constantly need repairs and upgrades over their life cycle versus building a high quality product initially. So productivity over the long run would be higher if you're building a lower quality product. I'd like either of you to comment on those scenarios in measures of productivity.
So I think economists developed the concept of GDP, let's say maybe 100 years ago, and there were limitations and problems back in the 1920s, and there are limitations and problems with it now. I wouldn't say that it is the be-all and end-all. I think that even in my remarks, we said you should also be looking at the distribution of overall income, and we should be looking at the risk around that, financial risks that people face. That's why our index of economic well-being takes into account 28 different indicators as opposed to GDP being the sole one. To the point that you make, which is likely the case of the tech sector, and the measurement of the tech sector is a very big difference between Canada and the US. So Meta, Google, Amazon, Netflix, all of these places that are headquartered in Silicon Valley have massive valuations and relatively limited, smaller footprints or number of workers. So the revenue per worker is quite high. I would be interested, so we haven't done this work yet, but StatCan did a study where they looked at the tech sector between the US and Canada. It's not surprising, measurement and GDP and productivity in the US tech sector is massively outpaces Canada. So it would be interesting to look ex-tech sector and even ex-energy, we've done that work before. What the difference is for the median or average sector or the average person across Canada if you exclude some of those, because I do think you're right that the U.S. numbers, there is some exceptionalism in their GDP per worker, and a large part of that is coming from just one small area around California.
Well, thank you very much. Well, witnesses, I appreciate your insight and your guidance here for us. Mr. Estill, I do just have to say before we go, I was a big fan of the movie Wayne's World, which of course is notorious for their selective placement of advertising. And I wanted to simply note that you've taken a page out of their book with that big flag behind you here. So I suddenly have and Thought I'd give you some credit for that, but always happy to see Canadian companies highlighted. Witnesses, thank you for your time. Colleagues, I'm going to suspend very briefly before we turn over to the next round.
Thank you.
To resume our meeting and get things underway. We've got some new witnesses with us today, three of whom are joining virtually, one here in the room. Appearing as an individual, we have Richard Dias, Global Macro Strategist. Welcome, Mr. Dias. We've got du Réseau de CCTT.
From the Réseau des CTTC, we have Ludovic Sousis, Chief Executive Officer, and Nancy Desiel, Chairman of the Board of Directors.
Advisor to the governor. So, colleagues, Mr. Santer, I will turn the floor to you first for introductory remarks of upwards of 5 minutes. Monsieur Sousis, Madame Desiel, je suis pas certain qui va.
Mr. Desiel and Mr. Sousis, I'm not sure who will be making the 5-minute remark. It will be me, Mr. Sousis.
Mr. Santer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hello, bonjour. Thank you for having me here today. I'll begin with where we are. To be blunt, Canada's productivity record is not great. This is not news to anybody here. And this poor performance is not something we can blame on one or two sectors of the economy or any particular region. It's a widespread problem across the economy and across the country. We're also getting worse. Over the past 5 decades, Canada's productivity has deteriorated more than that of other G7 countries. And our performance is particularly bad when compared to our nearest neighbor. So why does this matter? Productivity allows the economy to grow when resources are limited. It supports higher wages without fueling inflation. When productivity is rising, it can benefit everyone from a higher standard of living. But as Deputy Governor Nicolas Vincent said in a speech just last week, Canada right now is caught in a vicious circle. Because productivity is lagging, businesses can't increase wages as much as they otherwise would, and slower wage growth means weaker consumption. And faced with tepid demand, businesses are less likely to invest in new equipment, new technology. Sagging wages also make it harder for employers to keep our best workers in Canada and to attract talent from abroad. As Senior Deputy Governor Carolyn Rogers has said, we are facing a productivity emergency. And while we may all want a quick fix, the reality is that it won't be easy. We need to create the conditions that spur business investment. We need to encourage risk-taking, innovation, and growth. And
we need to make sure our workers have the right skills to generate the most value from their effort. I'm going to wrap up by addressing the obvious. The Bank of Canada does not directly influence productivity, but the bank can play a role in encouraging public dialogue on the issue.
Lagged at productivity. In the 1960s and the 1970s, we were a leader. We don't need to stay in this productivity purgatory. If businesses, governments, Canadians all pull in the same direction, we can escape the vicious circle that Vincent mentioned and reclaim our productivity edge. The other crucial role the bank plays is keeping inflation low, stable, and predictable. There's a lot of uncertainty out there right now. When businesses are confident that inflation will remain low and stable, it makes it easier for them to invest in new technologies or factory expansions or invest in the training that could ultimately improve their productivity. Thank you and merci.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Santer. Okay, Monsieur Sousis, à vous pour 5.
Mr. Sousis, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Ludovic Sousis.
My name is Ludovic Sousis. I'm the president and CEO of the CCTT network.
Du comité, merci beaucoup.
So thank you. With me is Nancy Desiel, chair of the board of directors of the network, chair of the board of directors of the Canada Foundation for Innovation, and executive director of CNETE CCTT in environmental technologies and electrochemistry in Shawinigan. So we're happy to contribute to your study on the productivity games. Canada is going through a difficult period.
La productivité qui est en recul
productivity has been stagnating for a number of years. And it is particularly impacting SMEs. So SMEs account for the vast majority of the industrial base in Quebec, and most exporters are SMEs. SMEs represent nearly 50% of private GDP, And they are, though it is those who structure our supply chains.
KPMG décrivait le
So
comme étant une sonnette.
the KPMG was describing an alarm bell with respect to improving productivity. There are too many companies, according to the firm, that need to review their competitiveness, and almost half are considering shifting their investments to the USA to protect their market access. So in this context, it's important to know that SMEs are often the most determined to innovate. So we have to take this crisis and change it into an opportunity for SMEs. So the CCTT network comprises 59 specialized centers with researchers and experts covering several strategic sectors: advanced manufacturing, energy, agri-food, digital, critical materials, cyber, securities, clean technologies, healthcare.
Et les chiffres sont clairs
And
en matière de
the figures are clear in terms of
59 centres travaillent avec.
So every year, these CCTTs carry out more than 13,000 projects carried out each year with over 6,000 companies and nearly $200 million in sales, equivalent to over $1.5 billion in economic impact. In 2024, they developed over 1,048 new products, and over 600 of them improved processes for our companies.
Plus de 240 brevets, licences et déclarations.
Over 240 patents, licenses, and invention declarations were created as well.
Ça fait en faveur des entreprises, ce qui est
So these SMEs
au pays.
Play a crucial role for keeping a competitive or productivity in Canada.
Développer des nouveaux produits exportables.
So the centers speak the same language as the companies: automate their production, improve their processes, reduce operating costs, develop new exportable products, obtain certifications to penetrate new markets, and optimize their supply chain. So we have 3 recommendations. So first, productivity must...
Les centres d'innovation comme les CCTT au programme de...
So SMEs...
Il y a un programme pan-canadien d'accompagnement.
We have to develop a cross-Canada product program to
vers d'autres pays, dont les États-Unis,
to stop productivity from going to other countries and help SMEs access new markets. And we have to use, we have to supply or use the applied research in the government's national defense strategy to support SMEs in their contributions to strategic supply chains and facilitate applied research in the development of dual usage technologies. So productivity is not a technical indicator, it's the key to prosperity.
PME.
We have the tools, the infrastructure, the experts, and the national network to act quickly. The only thing missing is the right incentives for Canadian SMEs.
La productivité de notre économie. Merci.
Thank you.
Monsieur Soucy.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Soucis. And my apologies, I said introductory remarks, introductoire in French, and I realize that introductoire is not really a word in French. So.
The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you guys can hear me, because I think there was a bit of an issue with the sound, but... Okay, good morning, everybody. It's an honor and a privilege to be here. I want to thank the members of this committee for the opportunity to share my views on addressing what the Bank of Canada calls an emergency, and what I would describe as the single biggest problem that Canada faces. It's also Canada's biggest opportunity. Our recent record is so poor, there's nowhere to go but up. And I would also add that solving Canada's productivity emergency is a rare thing, a panacea, and improving it will also solve many of the problems Canada faces: inflation, high debt, poor healthcare outcomes, the vulnerability to volatile trading partners. And what I'm most interested in, improving the standard of living of working class Canadians from coast to coast. So what is productivity? To quote the Bank of Canada, productivity is a way to measure how efficiently inputs such as labor and capital are used to produce a good or service. There are several measures of productivity, but labor productivity is most common. This measure is calculated by dividing the value of goods and services produced by the amount of labor required to produce them. At a national level, labor productivity is expressed by dividing gross domestic product by total labor hours worked. So now that we understand the definition of productivity, flawed as it may be, how can we improve it? So these are my recommendations. Number one, strengthen human capital. We need to expand training and reskilling to help workers adopt new technologies and move into higher value roles. Better align Canada's immigration system with the goal of improving productivity by focusing on attracting and retaining high wage and high skilled labor. Strengthen competition to drive innovation and efficiency. Competition is a major driver of productivity, as cited by the Bank of Canada. Many Canadian markets remain highly concentrated. To do this, we need to open to foreign competition sectors like telecom, transportation, and financial services. We need to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. We need to remove growth disincentives so small and medium-sized firms can scale. And we need to encourage more exports from the sectors that are the most productive. We need to also encourage firms to grow and obviously improve market expansion. Canada has too few large firms, and we need to shape our tax and regulatory systems to help scale rather than for them to stay small. Now, number two and number three seem in conflict, but they're not. Essentially, Canada tends to protect its big firms and hobble its small and medium ones, and we need to end that perversion. Number four, we need to build a more supportive policy around and regulatory environment. Policy setting strongly shapes productivity outcomes, naturally. Some of you may not like to hear this, but as it stands, Canada is a bad place to invest, as demonstrated by the massive net outflows of Canadians and their money. We need to reduce taxes such that the incentives to invest here can compete on a global stage. The Trump 2017 tax cut really hurt Canada, and it's something we don't discuss enough. We need to reduce the regulatory burden around emissions, shifting to a more holistic approach to protecting the environment, including biodiversity, clean rivers and lakes, etc. And five, we need to improve the business investment. We need to improve business investment, capital, technology, and intellectual property. This is by far the biggest issue. There is just not enough private sector investment in Canada, and we need to incentivize the private sector to invest more in machinery, plant, and equipment, increase spending on intellectual property, and upgrade infrastructure to support scaling and market access. Canada must reverse its chronic private sector underinvestment to improve labor force productivity. And finally, there must be an admission that although the role of government is absolutely vital to solving this problem, it is also limited. On several important and tangible measures, the federal government is as involved in the economy as it has been in a generation, and the results have been mixed, to say the least. Unfortunately, Ottawa cannot solve this problem on its own, but it can, and I believe it should, create the environment in which private sector can invest and flourish, and this will improve the labor productivity growth and ultimately improve the standard of living of working class people. Thank you, and I'm at your disposal for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, witnesses, for your introductory remarks. We'll now go into our line of questioning. Madame Dancho, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for your testimony so far. I have a few questions for you, Mr. Santor. Of course, you're the advisor to the Governor of the Bank of Canada, Tiff Macklem, and there's sort of really been two concerning visuals coming from the Bank of Canada in recent months and years. And the first, of course, was Mr. Macklem just last month. He was providing a press conference update, and he said, what's most concerning is that unless we change some other things, our standard of living as a country, Canadians, is going to be lower than otherwise would have been. And he did this sort of visual where he said it was going to be like this, and now it's going to be like this. Quite a stark warning, I think, for parliamentarians. And then, of course, last March 2024, you mentioned Ms. Rogers in your opening comments, and she is, of course, the Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. And she said, quote, you know those signs that say in an emergency break glass, well, it's time to break the glass. And she was, of course, referring to Canada's productivity issues. So two very clear warnings that we're hearing from the Bank of Canada. And then, of course, your colleague, Mr. Vincent, as well, the External Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, said deep down Canada's affordability problem is really a productivity problem. If we want to make things more affordable, we need to raise our income, and the way to grow our income is by increasing productivity. So just so that Canadians understand that productivity means their standard of living, really, when we talk about it. So do you feel that enough is being done? In fact, actually, you mentioned our productivity was great in the 60s and 70s. So would you say that Canada is doing enough to return us to that 60s, 70s productivity, or should we be doing more? And if so, what should we be doing?
What's been highlighted by Ms. Rogers and by Governor Macklem has identified this problem, and this is where we begin, is that the diagnosis of the problem is very important. So we have to look back and think about, okay, how have we gotten here? And so productivity is a very complicated issue. Many things go into what contributes to productivity. And so the things that need to happen, there's signs that things that are in the right direction and diagnosing the problem, and that things are, it's being talked about, and this committee speaks to that, which is very useful. And so we need to be thinking about many different things that this is a multifaceted problem, and there's many things that need to be done to resolve the issue. And so in these speeches, we've highlighted several of the things that have contributed to the slowdown in productivity, but also in the same time can benefit productivity growth going into the future. And so, for example, a few of these things are, it was mentioned in the last session, the regulatory burden in Canada has increased dramatically. StatsCan produced a paper on this, noting the rapid rise in regulations over in the pre-COVID era, and this has reduced the level of investment in the country. And so the question then becomes do we have the right amount of regulation? What can we do to make regulation as effective as possible and making sure that it enhances the ability to invest? So for example, that would be one thing. Another thing that was mentioned, another issue that was mentioned in Carolyn Rogers' speech was the need for the link between competition and productivity. And so we know that overall competitive markets tend to be positively correlated with innovation and investment, and therefore with productivity. And so the OECD has written on this subject for quite some time about the issues facing competition in the Canadian economy and what measures they propose. Measures. We're not the ones proposing measures, but they propose measures and think about how you can enhance competition inside the Canadian economy. And in particular, it's important to make sure that there's innovation, investment, and productivity growth. When you target certain industries, certain sectors, which have network effects inside the economy, they can be particularly beneficial. And so that was highlighted recently in a speech as well. I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you. And I appreciate that you brought up business productivity. And certainly from the Fraser Institute, we saw they put out some analysis on this, and they said from 2017 to 2024, our business productivity decreased by 0.6%, whereas the U.S. increased by over 10% in that same time. And of course, we've seen significant capital outflows over the last decade, but in particular since Mr. Trump 2.0 came along, as we know. And in fact, it was the National Bank of Canada economist Warren Lovely that said earlier this year that, quote, the cumulative outflow over the latest 5 months is in fact unprecedented. And he was referring to the capital outflow. So the Americans are doing something that's attracting a lot of Canadian dollars to invest in their economy. What sort of things could we be doing or should we be doing to reverse that, or at least keep the Canadian investment here? How can we incentivize that?
Certainly the U.S. experience gives us some things to think about. The first one is the degree of regulation inside the economy. Again, there's a balance. You need to have the right amount of regulation. You don't want to overdo it in either direction. That's something we point out in a recent speech, which is important. And so the other part, of course, is what's coming from large investments in AI, in digitalization in general. And certainly the U.S. is leading in this dimension globally. And so one has to look at that experience and think about what can we do to make sure that AI is being used, adopted, developed inside the Canadian economy. And so this is something that's it needs to be looked at very closely, and to think about how can we benefit from this technology. This is a general purpose technology, has wide applications across different elements of the economy. And so we have to ask ourselves, do we have the right environment? Are we doing the right things to make sure that we're encouraging that kind of innovation and investment in the digital space?
Thank you. And it's not just the Americans that are doing a bit better than us. In fact, I believe Canada has experienced the worst per capita GDP growth in the G7 over the last 10 years. So it seems that other countries are also doing a bit better than us in some of these ways. Is it like the U.S. with digitization and AI, or what are they doing that we're not?
Very quickly, please, Mr. Senator. Thank you.
There's many different things that go into comparing across many different countries is very difficult in a very broad sense, in the sense that there are very many different aspects or cyclical features that affect an economy. For example, we had an oil price shock in 2015 that had major implications for the oil sector, and so other countries didn't have that. And so we have to start thinking about what other countries are facing. And certainly, the business productivity issue in Canada is as we've described, this is an emergency, and so we need to be addressing it.
Madame Dantra. Mr. Bardisi, the floor is yours for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'll start with Mr. Santer. A question about business investment. And one of the, I believe, objectives of interest rate policy is to play a role in the business investment choices that are subsequently made. And so could you just speak to how the bank sort of tracks and evaluates how business investment is done in response to interest rate decisions that are made by the bank?
To the extent that business investment is tracked as part of the national accounts and it feeds into our assessment of where the economy is and where the economy is going in our forecast, we track it very carefully. And of course, the means by which monetary policy affects the economy through the transmission mechanism, through its impact on demand and also the cost of capital, is something that we follow closely. However, the specific characterization of how it works is really not the domain of this discussion. This is the conduct of monetary policy, the responsible of the governing council of the bank, and you should refer the questions to them.
I want to pick up on a couple of Ms. Dancho's questions around differential productivity numbers. And in the last panel, we had, I think, a chance to look at technology adoption as one of the variables that potentially affects productivity. And so I'm just wondering if you have any perspectives on technology adoption in Canada as something that is a variable in terms of our productivity performance.
Absolutely. So technology adoption is actually at the core of productivity growth. And in the current context, the adoption of not just AI, but also digitalization and automation is a very important thing to consider. And so the question then becomes, are we creating the conditions and environment for companies to take those risks, to make those investments, and to innovate, adopting the new technologies? And then again, that goes back to broader issues around regulation, competition, and so on.
J'ai quelques questions pour Monsieur Saucis.
I have a few questions for Mr. Saucis and for Ms. Desiel.
Vous avez parlé du rôle.
You talked about the role of SMEs in the economic growth of the country.
À cette session et les autres sessions.
But we have also talked in this meeting and in other sessions about the lack of bigger companies.
La croissance économique du Canada.
And the role in increasing economic growth in Canada. So is there something that could help both SMEs and foster the creation of bigger companies as well? And something that you could advise? Thank you for the question. One of the challenges in terms of innovation and innovation that leads to greater productivity. So one of the challenges will be the time of action. So a collaboration or an R&D project.
C'est important qu'on soit capable de créer.
It's important that we're able to create initiatives and mechanisms.
Il y a peu de PME qui ont des centres de...
There are very few SMEs that have R&D centers. A lot of bigger companies have a center like that. And they're very well organized in terms of research, development, and innovation. But SMEs, especially those with fewer than 50 employees, don't have those. So if we want to help them, we have to focus on their strengths. And we have to support them. So the CCTTs are part of the organizations that are working with SMEs on short programs, short projects, 2 to 4 months, 6 months, and then transfer the IP. So one of the challenges that we have on a bigger scale is the duration of innovation time. So if we realize that, we're in a crisis right now and we need more productivity in the next 2 or 3 years, we have to invest in the strengths of our ecosystem. And so, and that applies to both SMEs and bigger companies. Do you have any programs that you could recommend here in Canada? So the MyTac program in Canada, the federal government uses, which helps innovation that comes from. But are there other programs that you could recommend to us? Yes, the MyTax program is also based on skills, but I'll let my colleague answer that.
Vous parlez des programmes.
I'll let her talk about programs. The programs that are used are mainly interactive visits. Those are very well appreciated by SMEs.
Programmes recherche et développement.
They're also applied there are also our applied research and development programs that are popular. It allows our universities to optimize what they develop and make it industrializable. It allows them to scale up, to transfer the knowledge, to help implement this research in companies and to develop new processes or new products, and to train employees as well. So there are a lot of steps between what what comes out of is coming out of universities and what companies can implement, and the CCTTs and Canadian colleges are there to help. Are there policies to attract more IP to universities? SMEs are hesitant to use patents. The CTTs this year made it came up with over 240 inventions, but most SMEs feel unable to protect their patents when they're copied elsewhere in or outside the country. So there's a bit of innovation that's being underestimated in the figures that you're getting.
Mr. Bardisi.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bardisi. Mr. Sainte-Marie, you have 6 minutes. Thank you. So hello to all witnesses. My questions are, of course, for the Réseau des CCTT. So Ms. Desiel and Mr. Soussis, thank you for being here. So with your presentation, we understand helping promote. Could CCTTs do more? What is their potential? CCTTs could be doing much more. There were recent decisions from various levels.
Où on vit une petite contraction, on pourrait parler, là, surtout avec la maturité de l'écosystème là, des CCTT, on pourrait presque doubler la capacité d'action des CCTT en 12 mois avec les bons programmes puis des investissements ciblés dans des programmes de collaboration. Nos centres n'attendent que ça, d'être appelés à en faire davantage là, auprès des PME, auprès de secteurs stratégiques de l'économie. Toutefois, il faut être conscient que c'est pas que ce n'est pas uniquement leur volonté de le faire. Il y a la réalité du marché. Et un des leviers du gouvernement, c'est de créer des programmes ou des initiatives ponctuelles qui peuvent stimuler cette collaboration-là entre les PME.
Et M. Soussis, pardon, juste une minute. J'ai un député qui dit qu'il n'y a pas de...
Oh, I have a member who say that there is no interpretation. We'll just find a solution.
Monsieur Guglielmin, je fais un petit test pour voir si ça fonctionne.
I'm just going to do a test to see if it works.
Juste continuer.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Je disais que...
All right, thanks. So I was saying that it's not just up to the CCTTs to wait for something miraculous to turn up. Centers are very willing to do more, but they have to work within the context. And the current context is one that is difficult fiscally and in terms of... And there's also the economic context where businesses are hesitant to invest. So we need targeted programs. So the CRNGs
un programme de 108 millions dans le dernier
did not get their $108 million project renewed in the latest budget.
Canada, dont les centres collégiaux de transfert de technologie au Québec. C'est un élément mis sur la table.
This has to be brought to the table to ensure the sustainability of these SMEs.
Améliorer la capacité de collaboration des organisations.
But also to increase the ability of these organizations to work together.
Ce qui a trait à la défense, il y a une énorme...
In terms of defense, there's a huge industrial strategy that's being deployed by the government.
Aussi se répliquer.
And that will also have repercussions on provinces. And it's important to make room for R&D to help SMEs.
Qui vont avoir une valeur
ajoutée. There will be services and products that will be needed for that sector.
Lorsqu'il y a des industries qui sont frappées de plein fouet.
And for industries that are struck by tariffs and other microeconomic structures, we have to be able to support them and create initiatives that will help them to be more innovative. So the CCTTs are there to support businesses, to help them make changes, to create new products and services. So there's a lot of things.
Qui vont financer également les centres et les initiatives.
So there needs to be funding for these initiatives, but we can do more. Thank you.
Un rôle de locomotive dans l'innovation.
All right, so you have an engine, a role as a motor, if you will, or an engine to play.
Enveloppe de 108.
And now you're telling us that the $108 million that you had before was cut in the budget. Would you say that the federal government fully recognizes or acknowledges the role or the importance of the CCTTs? I think the focus was put on different things in the last budget.
Réseau des CCTT, les CCTT, mais surtout les...
Now, SMEs and the CCTTs would like to see a renewal of that $108 million in funding.
C'est surtout d'avoir des...
What's important is to have policies that are relevant for the context.
Le programme du CRSNG de $108 millions.
So the $108 million project that was over a 3-year period was still relevant in our view in terms of the crisis that we're experiencing with our biggest commercial partner. But we would be very happy to see that renewed.
La place en mettant de l'espace pour la recherche appliquée puis pour les
research and for
les plus importants des
colleges, which are the biggest contributors to SMEs or the biggest partners.
Parce que le rythme de collaboration est plus facile.
It's easier for SMEs to participate with colleges than it is with universities.
Et plus adapté à leur réalité.
It's more adapted to their reality. So the more we have adapted programs, the better it'll be for.
Vous avez fait référence au...
Thank you. You referred to opportunities in the defense strategy for CCTTs. There's also IA, and I have 30 seconds less, but could you talk about that as well for those sectors?
L'intelligence artificielle, c'est un secteur que je...
Yes, IA is a sector that I'm very familiar with. I worked in that area for 5 years. It's based on talent. So our SMEs have to be able to create or apply AI in their operations. And one of the challenges, especially for SMEs,
l'échelle et la mise à niveau,
will be the scaling up and training of their employees on the capacities that are available through IA, or through AI, rather.
Pour travailler avec les entreprises du Québec et les collèges.
So we have a certain ability to work
PME
to provide training for SMEs to help them understand how AI can help them.
Ça devient une des clés de voûte pour la...
AI is a key to the success of tomorrow.
En train de travailler là-dessus sont déjà en retard.
And those companies who aren't yet using it are late.
D'efforts particuliers pour ça, mais il y a un potentiel.
So there is potential.
Mr. Saint-Henri. Colleagues, just before going to Mr. Guglielmin for 5 minutes, we're tracking quite a bit over time at the moment. So as of right now, cutting the final two, just so that both sides are aware. I'll keep an eye on the clock, but just making sure everybody tries to do their best to keep to the allotted time, please.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Diaz, you've said that Canada faces a productivity emergency, high debts, capital flight, and that, and I quote, the government's economic footprint is at a 30-year high at the same time as we face a productivity emergency, end quote. So suggesting that it might be time for a change in philosophy. Now, earlier this month, McKinsey has similar findings, and they say that the general government gross debt has climbed to about 107% of GDP, with debt charges now a top 5 line item in public spending. Mr. Diaz, do you think we have a debt problem in Canada?
I mean, that's a very, very difficult question to ask. I mean, I think we have I mean, Canada is and should be one of the richest countries in the world. We have enormous oil reserves. We have enormous natural resources. I think what we have done really is squander a lot of that. And so when we say, do we have a debt problem in inverted commas, I think we have an interest payment problem. I think it's an increasingly large share of our revenues. I think we mostly have a spending problem. I'm not sure if we have a debt problem necessarily, if that makes sense. I think there's some nuance to that question I think any economist would suggest.
Yeah, that's helpful. So federal government's budget came out recently, and it says the deficit will be $78 billion. Do you think it will remain $78 billion, or it's likely to be higher?
No, sir. That deficit projection is based on some relatively rosy, albeit normal forecasts for growth. The problem is that those interest payments and more importantly the revenue payments that sort of underpin those interest payments as a percentage of GDP or as debt are based on those rosy forecasts. And if anything goes wrong, whatever, you'll have a situation where the revenues won't be as strong as they are suggested in the budget, and the debt and therefore interest payments will necessarily rise rather quickly.
So what do you think consequences if the Liberal government blows past their fiscal anchor of a declining debt to GDP ratio?
I mean, I think in general what it means is that, we'll just have sort of on the margin, again, everything is at the margin, and that's where we live as economists, and I think that that's what we should be focused on. It'll mean basically higher interest rates and higher inflation. But that is not to say that there aren't other things that may happen at the exact same time that will pull down on inflation. For example, if there's lower aggregate demand because of a recession, you might have a situation where deficits rise substantially and you have weaker inflation. The issue is not necessarily how much revenue the federal government is collecting. We know as a percentage of GDP, it's at a 25-year high, about 15%. The issue is where that money is being allocated. And I would submit to you that in the current budget's own, by the current budget's own admission, an 8.1% increase in program spending it was not necessarily as effective as I think it could have been, as demonstrated by having zero productivity growth over the last 10 years.
So you've also warned that young Canadians are being gaslit about the economy, and even if the U.S. tariffs were to vanish tomorrow, we'd still have structural problems. For instance, low productivity, high indebtedness, and heavy foreign ownership of our bonds. The Bank of Canada, we heard here, now directly links the Canadian affordability crisis to productivity growth. Can you explain what it means when you say Canadians are being gaslit about the economy? And what do you see as the real drivers of our productivity stagnation and capital flight?
Sure. I think two things can be true at the exact same time, and I think we have a hard time sometimes holding those two opinions that may seem contradictory but are in fact complementary. Donald Trump's protectionism is completely unjustified, and I want to make that very, very clear. However, virtually every single problem that Canada is dealing with is a structural problem that has been entrenched for years. And I think what's really, really important is to just we need to be focused on sort of the big picture. Donald Trump won't be president forever. Trade relations will normalize, but things that we've discussed in this meeting and others will not necessarily go away, which is the deficit issue, housing affordability, productivity emergency, the chronic lack of business investment, which I think is fundamentally the real issue underpinning all of these productivity conversations. I mean, all of that was true, when the Deputy Bank of Canada Governor, Carolyn Rogers, wrote what I think is probably the most important speech in Canadian economic history, which is the fact that we are suffering a productivity emergency. And Mr. Vincent basically just reiterated all of her suggestions as to how we can fix it. So, the focus on Donald Trump is maybe it's a Pyrrhic victory on his part, because I think if we can coalesce around how to solve these problems when he disappears, Canada can at least be repositioned, at least philosophically, to do the right things.
Thank you very much, Mr. Goulian. Mr. Baines, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses joining us today. I'm going to start with Mr. Santor. If you could sort of, we had a panel earlier. They talked about how hard it was to do business overseas. There's challenges around transactions, peer-to-peer, and there's been talk about introducing stablecoin. I'm curious to hear a little bit about that from you. If you look at peer-to-peer transactions, payments, cross-border payments, remittances, and if we can see a strong adoption in emerging markets like Latin America and Africa, where financial infrastructure is limited, do you think there is immediate nature of stablecoin transactions and their adoption in emerging markets, if that can be for Canadian businesses as they seek to grow and enhance productivity?
Yes, in Carolyn Rogers' recent speech on productivity, she highlighted the need for innovation, and particularly innovation matters a lot inside the financial sector, and because the financial sector touches every part of the economy, and so if the financial sector becomes more productive, more efficient, then that can benefit the entire economy. And stablecoin represents an innovation, a very interesting innovation that people are still thinking about how it's going to work, what it's actually going to look like in practice, and how it can be used. So it certainly provides the potential for being one example of that kind of innovation that can benefit efficiency inside the financial sector that could then spill over to the rest of the economy. However, we need to be very mindful on how this is going to be regulated and make sure that it's fit for purpose and fit for use. And so this is a very active file globally to think about how stable coins will be part of the can or will be part of the financial system going forward. And that's just one example, but there are other examples of how continued innovation inside the financial sector can benefit the economy more broadly, and that's something that she mentioned quite explicitly, given its network importance inside of what we do. So.
Okay, and just building a little bit on that, we know there's been a lot of talk, of course, and not only today, but we're witnessing an important time in probably global history, global business, disruptive policies from our neighbors, trying to friendshore with others, and we know that our Prime Minister recently has had some success at the G20, trying to ensure that we can diversify our markets, and with respect to a lot of the disruption in global shipping lines and all of these things that we're noticing with more dangerous political environment. How do you think Canada can position itself to attract high value, high opportunity investment, and continue to work towards being a global leader in these new strategic areas?
So I think the global economy is going under a large integration of global trade, and at the same time, the AI revolution is also providing a big structural shock to what's happening. And so I think the things that lean towards improving productivity here in Canada are the things that would speak to what you're concerned about. And so to the extent that we have the right regulatory framework, we have an environment which provides regulatory certainty and the right level of regulation, at the same time provides the right amount of competition inside the economy, as I mentioned before, this will provide the ecosystem in which Canadian firms and businesses can make those decisions to innovate, invest, and make them resilient to a world that's going to be full of shocks, and as we say in economics, full of shocks in the coming years and decades. And so to position ourselves to be that resilient, we need to take those measures that will improve our productivity.
Okay, and maybe if you can, are there specific sectors in Canada, industrialization in a new way, natural resources, financial services, and other technologies? I know we've talked about AI and quantum computing. There's been a significant investment in my home province of British Columbia. University of British Columbia is seen as a leader, a lot of the leader in AI. What are some high potential measures or industries that you can maybe think of where we can enhance productivity?
As noted in the speech, improving the productivity in network-based industries that have networks-based, such as communications, finance, transportation, those are high-impact areas because their productivity gains also spill to the rest of the economy. But more generally, AI provides a perfect example of a general-purpose technology that can be used almost anywhere in the economy to improve things. And so the question is, do we have the right mix of things we need to make that happen? And I think we need to emphasize it's not just the regulatory environment and competition, but also do we have the right skills inside our workforce to take advantage of that? And so it goes to making sure we have the right skills match, as we say, to take advantage of those technologies.
That's it, Perm. Yep. OK, la dernière question, M. Saint-Marie, on va te donner 60 secondes.
Last question, Mr. Saint-Marie, you have 60 seconds.
Madame Desiel ou
All right. Mr. Sousis and Ms. Desiel, is funding per project an issue for you?
Nancy.
Nancy, go ahead.
C'est très important.
Yes, it's very important. Businesses don't have a lot of projects to conduct innovation projects. So often to go a little further in their strategic planning to begin that cycle. So yes, project funding is crucial for that. But for the sustainability of centers, what we'd like to see is to have funding that's given to us to be able to work with businesses with responsibility or responsible measures as well, to make sure that public funds are being well spent. But that would allow us to plan our activities with businesses. It's important to know that businesses work. Well, we work with about 100 businesses every year. So submitting applications for each project represents a lot of work. And that's work that at the time that they could spend on other activities on the ground. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Saint-Marie. Thank you to the witnesses today.
De guidance. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Thank you for your guidance.
Insight and guidance. Colleagues, we will meet again on Wednesday. Meeting adjourned.